Hey, it's Kristina, Maker Exchange, bringing episode 22 of video editing. Today we're going to do cinematic effect using iMovie. So a lot of people always want to create that blockbuster hit look. So we're going to do a couple tips and tricks that we can use within iMovie and kind of give that effect. Some of the things we're going to go over is getting our footage, if we're filming with a phone, as a lot of people are, doing color correction with iMovie, looking at filters really quick, as well as music. Try and get as many shots in as possible when you're on set. It is easier to edit out than it is to edit in. Next is going to be adding another camera or moving the camera to another angle to break up the shot and keep it fresh. Also, if you can, get a couple shots in with 120 plus frames per second so we can get a couple slow-mos in, and the higher the frames per second, the slower you can go. B-roll is a very important factor. Get as much as you can so that way you can tell the story in a different way and create depth, as well as you can use this footage to help correct or cover any errors that were taking place during your A-roll. And then you also have the option of adding a time lapse. So if you want to create the effect of time passing by very quickly or moving the story along, a time lapse can be a great resource. And then also being sure to get a couple close-ups or to use a good enough camera to zoom in later. And then getting some movement or motion shots as well can help tell the story without using your main characters. If we're using our phone, if you have an older phone, you might only have the availability of the standard lens. If you have a newer phone, there should be the option of a wider lens, and here you can see the difference. The standard is still good, but the wide lens really does add a little bit more. And of course, moving on to color. So color is a really important factor into creating that cinematic effect, whether it be with what they're wearing, if it's going to be creating the emotion that is going through for the character, or if it's going to be implementing the weather or the season. If you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and check out Power of Color episode where we go more in depth into the power of color. So opening up iMovie, I have a few shots that we can use just to go over how iMovie can help create that cinematic effect using color correction. So here I have a young woman where you can see it's a little washed out. If I just use the automatic color correction, it does add in a lot of depth. And for that cinematic effect, depending on what you're looking for, but right now it's very popular to have a lot of contrast and saturation. So I'm just going through and playing with the contrast, the highlights and the shadows, as well as the temperature to see if I can get to match this particular shot where she looks a little upset or melancholy. So I'm trying to add a little bit more depth to her shot. So I'm actually matching this shot of the young woman with the park shot. So I'm going to have the contrast of the happiness that is going on at the park and the lightness that I have added. And then we're going to go to a close-up of the young woman who is at the park and is feeling a little low, maybe a little depressed or melancholy. So here you can see how we're zoomed right in and creating more of an effect that would implement sadness or being upset or melancholy. And one of the things that we can do is we can actually utilize our filters. Filters should be used sparingly, especially depending on what the outcome you want. If you're going for a cinematic effect, most of these are not going to work for you, but there's a few depending on the kind of movie you want to create, such as Western or film noir. But most of the cartoons or any of the other filters would be great for snippets to create a certain impact, but should be used sparingly. And also transitions should be used sparingly, as with most cinematic movies, the transitions are actually very subtle. So here you can see a couple of the examples of how the filters may or may not work depending on what you're looking to create. So moving on to the field, here we have some B-roll that has these beautiful plants in this beautiful field. I want to use this shot and make it maintain natural, but really make the plants pop without it looking too cartoonish. So I'm just playing with the settings to try and create a little more saturation, a little more contrast, without it looking too blue or too yellow in the background. So when you're editing, be sure that you're not just looking at the focal point, but also the surroundings to make sure that the entire scene looks the way that you intended it to. Now here we're at the park. So this is the complimentary footage that I have of the melancholy woman. So I'm going to create this shot to be nice and bright, look like a summer day, and contrast to her melancholy blue vibes that she has going on with the deep shadows. And so I'm just going to play with the contrast and the highlights, removing a lot of those shadows to make it nice and bright and warm. Here we have some B-roll with a man walking away. I want to really focus on the leaves and the dirt and create a high saturation, high contrast so that you can see all of the details without the actual footage looking too dark. I want to keep it lighter, keep it looking more on the brighter and happier side. So I'm going to make sure that we have pretty strong shadows and saturation and contrast, but I'm also going to make sure our highlights are looking good as well so that the trees do not look like they are too dark. And of course, there's music. So one of the greatest cinematic effects is utilizing a score for the music. It is a great way to enhance the film as well as create an emotional impact to your scene. Another option is using a soundtrack or even a blend between a soundtrack and a score. A soundtrack is going to allow you to tell the story without actually having the characters tell the story. So it's another cinematic effect similar to using color. So you can use specific music, specific songs that will carry the theme or the emotion through. So if you want more information on the power of music, go ahead and check out that episode where we go way more in depth into it. Now, when we look at iMovie and what we have as options for music, you do, of course, have the music that you have downloaded, of course, making sure that it is copyright free or that you have permissions. We also do have under audio sounds. Now, with the sounds, we do have some options that are a little bit longer, up to 2 or 3 minutes. And there are, as you can see, a lot of different options to go through that should at least have one option that works for that particular scene that you need. And if you just drag and drop, you can just drop it straight into your scene, and you can even play around with it, creating the fade in, fade out, and making it a little more subtle. And that's it for today. See you next time.